Once upon a time, there lived a 12-year-old beggar whose name was BC. She begged on the streets of Lagos with her poor mother, who sat in the corner with a rusty plate, pretending to look helpless. BC's small stature and wide-eyed expression often fooled passerby into believing that she was just another unfortunate child struggling to survive. But behind those innocent eyes was a darkness so deep that it could make a grown man shiver. BC did not just beg for money, she demanded it like a queen, and anyone who dared to refuse her became her sworn enemy. She didn't just walk away muttering curses under her breath, she struck back, and her vengeance was always cruel. One hot afternoon, she approached a fruit seller, smiling sweetly as she asked for free oranges. The woman laughed and told her to go away, but BC's face hardened. She kicked the woman's basket of ripe mangoes and oranges into the filthy gutter, watching them float away as the woman screamed. BC did not care. She laughed at the fruit seller from a distance, saying that now she will know how it feels to live in the gutters. The fruit seller's knees weakened as she watched her hard-earned mangoes and oranges swirl in the dirty water, bumping against empty sachet water bags and scraps of nylon. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but Bissy simply turned away, whistling a careless tune as if she had just done something clever. People nearby shook their heads in disbelief, but no one stepped forward. They all knew Bissy, and they knew that crossing her meant inviting a storm that one could not escape. That same evening, as Bissy was walking down the road, looking for who to beg, she came across a man who parked his car by the roadside. He was rushing to the nearby shop to photocopy some documents when Bissy approached him and requested for 200 naira. Her tone made the man look at her confused. Bissy was not pleading for money. She spoke with so much authority in her voice that an absolute stranger would think that she gave the man some money to keep for her. The young man, hearing the entitlement in her voice, ignored her completely and walked into the shop to photocopy his documents. He had the business meeting in 2 hours and had to hurry up because of the Lagos traffic. After photocopying his documents, he rushed back to his car to realize that his car tires were flat. BC had slashed the tires with a knife. The man froze in shock as his mouth opened like a fish out of water. All four tires were completely flat and he did not know what to do. His neatly pressed outfit was already damp with sweat as he bent down to inspect the tires. The urgency of his meeting pounding in his head. Who did this? He shouted, looking around frantically as BC, who was leaning casually against the kiosk, walked closer and began to speak. Na me do am. Wetin you go do? She said boldly, tossing a peanut shell to the ground. You no wan give me 200 naira abi? Now, use and fix your tire, stingy man, she said as his jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. Do you know what you've just done? I have an important meeting and I need this car to get there, he said as BC cut him off with a loud mocking laughter that made people glance in her direction. The young man, filled with so much fury, began to look for a vulcanizer around. He finally found one, but by the time the vulcanizer arrived, his meeting had already started without him. He sat on the edge of the pavement, head in his hands, watching the tires being pumped one after the other. Every hiss of air felt like a clock ticking against him. His phone buzzed with a call from his business partner, but he couldn't bring himself to answer. BC, however, skipped away into the crowd, humming to herself as if she had just done the most natural thing in the world. To her, his loss was nothing, just another lesson in her twisted mind. BC felt so entitled. Her mother, despite receiving several complaints from people, did nothing about her daughter's crude character. Even when BC acted so unruly to strangers in her presence, her mother ignored her completely as she focused on her own begging. One evening, BC slipped a dead rat into the bag of a woman who ignored her demands for money. The woman only discovered about the rat when she arrived at her office with the offensive stench behind her. The embarrassment she felt in that moment was second to none, as she wondered how the dead rat got into her bag in the first place. Little did she know that it was the beggar who she ignored at the busy junction a few hours ago. BC did things that made people cringe. One morning, she approached a roadside vendor to beg for some food. The woman had barely begun to sell her food as she chased BC out of her roadside kiosk. BC was so full of rage, she walked out of the kiosk and scooped a handful of sand. Without thinking twice, BC threw the sand into the pot of the woman's steaming jollof, condemning the entire food. The woman screamed in disbelief, staring at the pot that she had just woken before dawn to prepare. She tried scooping the sand out, but it was already too late, as the tiny grains had mixed into every part of the food. Customers waiting nearby shook their heads in pity as they began to curse at BC, who stood across the road grinning, her arms folded as though what she did was normal. She told the woman to eat her food alone, since her hands were as stiff as a glue, and the woman broke down in tears as she watched BC walk off like nothing happened. Just as she was walking away, BC came across a beautiful woman who smiled and walked past her. She asked for 500 naira, and the woman looked at her confused. She dipped her hand into her bag and brought out a clean 100 naira note and handed to BC, who began to rain insults at her. "Does this look like 500 in your eyes? Or are you now blind?" BC asked the woman, who froze, stunned that a child could speak to her in such a way. The woman gave a tight smile and said softly, "If you don't want it, you can give it back," she said to BC, whose voice rose like thunder. "Who wants to collect your dirty money? Are you mad? Na beg I beg you o, no be say I poor reach your papa." A small crowd had already begun to gather, drawn by her loud insults. The woman, embarrassed by the attention, tried to walk away quickly, clutching her bag close to her side, but BC's eyes narrowed. She darted forward like a cat pouncing on prey as she grabbed the woman's wig and yanked it clean off her head. Gasps erupted from the crowd as the woman's unkempt and unevenly braided hair was exposed for all to see. A ripple of laughter passed through the onlookers, some covering their mouths, whilst others pointed at her as they whispered amongst themselves. The woman's face turned red with shame. She bent to snatch her wig from BC's small hands, but BC danced back, waving it in the air like a prize. "See fine auntie wey no get hair, na so wig dey cover her secret," BC shouted as she laughed hysterically. Then she tossed the wig into a muddy puddle by the roadside as the woman stood frozen, torn between picking it up and walking away to save what little dignity that she had left. BC, satisfied with the humiliation she had caused, walked off slowly, swinging her arms as though she had just accomplished something grand. The crowd, still chuckling, began to disperse, leaving the woman crouched by the puddle as she tried desperately to shake off the mud from her once beautiful wig. BC felt she was unstoppable. Her terrible character grew worse as each day passed. Her voice grew louder, her insults sharper, and her attacks more reckless. She tore market women's nylons of tomatoes when they ignored her, smashed a shop glass with a stone because the owner refused to dash her some biscuits. She even slapped a conductor who gave her only 50 naira change because she requested for something more. Then, one afternoon, she shoved the woman into the path of an oncoming bus. The crowd screamed as a quick-thinking bystander acted swiftly and pulled the woman back in time as her body missed being crushed by the incoming bus. The woman collapsed to the floor on the pavement, shaking as she clutched her chest in shock as people gathered quickly, furious as murmurs began to ripple through the crowd. "This child has gone too far," one man shouted as he pointed angrily at BC, saying that BC had to be thoroughly cautioned before things get out of hand. Another man stepped forward angrily as he narrated how BC pushed a woman into the gutter a few weeks ago because the woman refused to give her some money. BC, instead of showing fear, stood with her arms folded, a smirk tugging at her lips as she replied them, saying that it was their fault. "If them dash me money, it for no happen," she said as two young men stepped forward and grabbed her by the arms. BC kicked and screamed, but more people joined in as they surrounded her like a moving wall. They dragged Bisi through the market street, her bare feet scraping against the hot ground as traders and bystanders peered out from their stalls, some shaking their heads, whilst others muttered curses underneath their breath. When they reached the corner where her mother sat, the crowd pushed Bisi forward as one of the men began to speak. This your child almost killed someone now. She pushed her into the road, and the woman was almost crushed by a moving vehicle. If you don't caution your daughter now, you will end up in trouble that your head cannot carry, he said to Bisi's mother, who looked up at him lazily as she adjusted her dress. Instead of showing remorse or shame, she chuckled and said to the man, if una dey fear small pikin, na una wahala be that o. My pikin no dey do anything wey no good for am. Na street we dey, so make una dey mind una business. Her words stunned the crowd into silence as the murmurs grew into angry shouts. You're the one spoiling your child, some said, whilst others revealed that Bisi's mother was the real problem. They warned her regardless, stating that this was her last chance to keep her daughter under control, warning that the next time Bisi did anything outrageous, she would not be spared. But Bisi's mother treated their warning with levity. She never cautioned her daughter as Bisi continued to rain havoc on the streets. She seemed to grow more brazen with each passing day, almost as though the public warning had boosted her ego instead of humbling her. Days passed, and Bisi continued in her terrible ways. She met a bread seller who was carrying a tray of freshly baked bread on her head. She asked for a loaf of bread, but the woman told her that the bread was for sale. Bisi demanded for a loaf with so much entitlement in her voice. The woman looked at her as unserious and spoiled. She walked away from Bisi, trying not to have any form of altercation with her, but Bisi, unable to withstand it, slapped the woman's tray from behind as the bread tumbled onto the dusty road. The bread seller could not believe her eyes. Her entire business was now on the floor as Bisi grabbed one loaf and began to walk away. In the far corner stood a man who witnessed everything that happened. He stopped Bisi and asked why she did what she did, but Bisi yelled out angry at him, warning him to mind his business. The man, who was not out to look for trouble, got into his car and was about to drive off. Bisi took a sharp rock in her hand and scratched deep lines across the shiny paint of his car. The screech of the stone against the paint made the man's heart drop. He slammed his door shut and jumped out, his face twisted with anger. Are you mad? He barked, marching towards her as Bisi moved back in fear. She threw herself to the ground, her tiny hands clutching her chest as she began to scream at the top of her lungs. Kidnapper! Kidnapper! Help me! He wants to kidnap me! The words tore through the busy streets like fire on grass as heads turned. Traders abandoned their stalls, and within seconds, a crowd had formed. The man froze, his anger replaced by extreme shock. What? No, she's lying. I didn't try to kidnap her. She just crashed my car, he said, but his voice was drowned out by the angry voices of the mob. Street boys surged forward, their faces burning with rage at the thought of a child being harmed. They grabbed the man by his shirt, punching and kicking him before he could even explain himself. Kidnap Pikin for our street? One shouted, revealing that today would be the last day that the man ever kidnapped a child in his life. His pleas for mercy fell on deaf ears as someone brought out an old tire, shoving it over his shoulders. A bottle of petrol appeared, and before he could take another breath, the tire was set ablaze. The bread seller tried to stop them, but the people did not listen to her. They believed the child who they thought was innocent. Flames roared around him as he collapsed to the ground, screaming out in agony. Bisi stood from a safe distance, her arms folded as she watched the man go up in flames. She had done terrible things before, but this was the darkest of them all. She had sent an innocent man to a horrific death, and she felt no remorse at all. Only a cold, twisted satisfaction that the man deserved what he got for poke nosing into her business. After what had just happened, one would think that Bisi would change, but this did not happen, as Bisi was not the kind to learn lessons. If anything, the death of the man seemed to embolden her further. However, the police raided the scene. Their sirens wailed through the streets as uniformed men poured into the area, shouting for people to come outside. It turned out that the man they burned down was not just anybody. He was the only son of a highly influential businessman who had deep political ties. The news spread like wildfire, and the weight of his father's name sent a wave of fear through the community. Everybody here will answer for this, one officer barked as they went from door to door, dragging out young men and questioning shop owners, demanding to know what had truly happened. Luckily, they found a recording of everything that happened. The men responsible for the incident were all arrested, and the police began to search for BC. Her mother, on hearing this, took BC and fled to a faraway place. She could not risk them arresting her daughter, so she decided to change location to a place where no one knew who they were. They slipped into the back of an old truck, heading out of Lagos. The journey was long and dusty, but BC's mother did not mind. All she cared about was putting as much distance as possible between them and the police. They arrived a small town on the outskirts of Ibadan, where no one knew their faces, their names, or the dark trail that they left behind. Her mother wasted no time. She picked a busy market corner and sat with her rusty plate. BC, on the other hand, resumed her own begging. For the first few days, people pitied her and gave her money, but it wasn't long before the real BC came out. She met a meat seller who sold suya by the roadside. BC begged the man for some suya with the same arrogance that she had used to beg for money, and the man informed her that his suya business was not for dash and that if she had money, he would sell to her. BC stood there and watched as the man sprinkled some pepper on the customer's suya. Filled with so much rage, BC flung his pepper seasoning into his eyes. The man maintained a sense of calm that was so terrifying before he finally disappeared before her eyes. Terrified, BC ran to her mother, but before she could explain anything, her body began to change. Her fingers curled into hooves, her skin sprouted coarse hair, and her voice turned into a bleating cry. Within moments, BC had transformed into a goat. Her mother screamed out in terror as she wondered what could have happened. BC did not have the time to tell her mother what she did. Before turning into a goat, her mother sat there terrified as BC continued to bleat and bleat as if she was explaining what had happened to her. However, her mother could not understand a word. From that day on, BC lived her life as a goat. She wandered the very streets that she had once terrorized. People treated her like an animal, and the power she believed that she had vanished before her eyes. Gone were the days when she could back insults at strangers or destroy someone's goods without fear. Now, children threw stones at her, chased her away from food stalls, and mocked her with the same cruel laughter that she once used on others. BC had no voice to defend herself, no arms to fight back, only the helpless bleating of a goat. Her once proud eyes now darted with fear whenever she saw a human pass. Each day, hunger gnawed at her belly as she searched for scraps, chewing on paper and dirty leaves as the taste of warm suya and ripe mangoes now became a memory. One cloudy afternoon, as BC sat in the corner of the street with tears streaming down her goat's eyes, an old woman passed by her and stopped, her wrinkled gaze piercing deep into BC's soul. "I know who you are," the woman said in a low voice as she continued to speak. "The streets remember BC. Every cruel act, every wicked word, they don't vanish. They follow you waiting for the day you will answer for them." BC froze, her heart pounding. The woman crouched beside her as she continued to speak. "There is only one way for you to return to the girl you once were, but it is almost impossible," she said to BC, who she told that her curse can only be broken when a kind stranger invites her into his or her home and feeds her some food. Only this unusual level of kindness will be able to break the curse that had kept her bound. BC, on hearing this, rushed to her mother to inform her of the solution, but her mother could not understand a word that she was saying, so BC decided to do it on her own. She approached people one after the other, hoping to find a kind person who would be willing to invite a goat into their home, but everyone she met chased her away like an animal. BC even began to run into the homes of people uninvited, but the people hurled huge sticks at her as they chased her out. She tried sneaking into backyards, bleating desperately, but dogs barked furiously and guards threw stones until she fled. Days turned into weeks, and Bissy's fur grew dirty and matted. Hunger gnawed at her insides as she continued to search for the kind stranger that the old woman had spoken about. One rainy evening, she wandered into a lonely street and saw a dim light flickering through the open door of a small house. Inside, a frail elderly man sat alone, coughing into a worn handkerchief. Beside him was a plate of Ghanian granules. Drawn by hunger, Bissy stepped into the doorway. The man turned his head, his tired eyes resting on her. For a moment, she expected him to shout or throw something at her, but instead, he sighed and spoke out to her. "You're shivering," he said, as he invited the goat into his house. Bissy froze as her heart began to race. She stepped closer, her hooves clopping softly on the wooden floor. The old man reached for the plate and pushed it towards her. "Eat. You look like you've been wandering for a long time," he said to the goat as she walked towards the plate. The moment her lips touched the food, a sharp heat surged through her body. Her legs trembled, her vision blurred, and the room spun around her. The old man's voice faded, replaced by a ringing in her ears. When the dizziness passed, she looked down. Her hooves were gone, her hands had returned, her skin was now human again. The old man's eyes widened in shock. "What in God's name?" he whispered as Bissy, now crouched on the floor, remembered every cruel thing that she had ever done. The laughter, the insults, the destruction, it all crashed down on her like a wave. She looked at the old man as tears filled her eyes, not from gratitude but from shame. Bissy began to apologize as she confessed everything to him. The old man listened quietly, his wrinkled hands folded in his lap. When she had finished, he said softly, "You have been given a second chance, child. Most never get that, but a second chance means nothing if you live like you did before. You know now how it feels to be powerless, hungry, and mocked. Let that feeling teach you." Bissy lowered her head. For the first time in her life, she felt something that she had never known before, the heavy ache of guilt. She returned to her mother, who was so excited to see her again. Bissy's mother apologized to her for never cautioning her, promising to lead her down the right path from now on. Bissy hugged her mother tightly, the first genuine embrace that they had ever shared. "I'm sorry too, Mama," she whispered, "for everything I've done, for the shame I brought to us." From that day on, Bissy changed completely. She no longer demanded money or food with arrogance. Instead, she offered to carry loads for traders, sweep the front of their stores, or fetch water from the well in exchange for some money or food. One day, she met a woman who mistakenly dropped her purse. Bissy returned the purse to the woman, and the woman, moved by her sincerity, changed their lives completely. She took them away from the street and transformed their lives for the better. She gave them a small house and opened a small business for Bissy's mother. She also put Bissy in school, and Bissy's life changed for the better. She learned her lesson the hard way and promised herself never to be arrogant again in her life. The lesson to be learned from this story is that the way you treat others when you have power will be the same way life will treat you when you have none. Cruelty may make you feel strong for a moment, but it always plants seeds that grow into your own suffering. Kindness, however, builds bridges that can save you when you need them most. Busy story teaches that no one is too far gone to change, but change only matters when it's backed by humanity, remorse, and the willingness to do better. And above all, it reminds us that every action, good or bad, returns to the one who sent it. I hope you enjoyed the story.